Now I am very happy to introduce Jessica Ross. She's a senior researcher for Project Zero at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome this morning.
I'm going to hide my coffee cup now. Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Sounds like this sounds pretty good, even back there. I can't see way back there, but so I want to get right into it today. We don't have a ton of time together, but I want to acknowledge people spending their Saturday morning here, which I think is a big commitment in time, considering all that you do. I have been working at Project Zero full-time for about the past 2.5 years on a project that I'm actually not addressing today, but a project that actually brings me out to the West Coast a lot. So I've been here quite a bit working with some schools in Oakland. But I came to the work at Project Zero as a classroom teacher. So I was a humanities middle school classroom teacher for 11 years. And I used Artful Thinking in my practice beginning my second year of teaching. And so as a practitioner with Harvard Project Zero researchers coming into my classroom with my kids. I worked in an inner city public school the first time. Shari Tishman, who was the director for a long time at Project Zero and did a ton of work in museums. First time she came into my classroom with a camera and a tripod, my students asked if she was from the show Cops. So I said, no, slightly different from a university up the road called Harvard. But so that was my classroom, and that's where I started doing this work. And it had a great impact on the way I taught and the way I thought about learning and education. So it's a passion project of mine, and I'm really happy to be here with you all sharing it, and particularly to be in this amazing museum, which has I think it's large it's comprehensive in its collection. It's amazing. I was here yesterday previewing that. So I'm going to give you a little preview of what we're going to do today. So I'm going to give a few minutes just about PZ, as we call it, Project Zero, and the Artful Thinking, but I want to also then get in and actually look at a piece together, and look at a piece in a way that may be really familiar to the way you look at art, or might be slightly different, and just have us all experience that together, try it out, see what it feels like, talk about that a little bit. And so that is going to feel a little stretched and slow. We'll take a little bit of time with that. And then I'll give you tiny background on the research, and I have plenty more information if you want on the research, if there's more you're interested in. Talk a moment or two about the role of information, and then we get to go up into the galleries and try it out, try some of these things out for ourselves. I want to let you know that I can't see anybody who's coordinating here today, but if there's access for you via email, I prepared the whole PowerPoint slide in a PDF, and actually I have more text on the PDF that I prepared that shares the way I'm going through the routine. So as long as you can get an email to Jill or to Stacy, that can be emailed to you. So you can take copious notes if you want to, if that's the way you learn, but you don't have to take any. This is all prepared. And I have my email on the last slide, so you're welcome to email me and ask for it as well, okay? And then we'll come back here together and sort of talk about what happened when we were up in the gallery at the end of the day, at the end of our morning. All right? Does that sound okay? So you get a little information about Project Zero. The name is a little strange. Project Zero was started about 47 years ago by a philosopher named Nelson Goodman. And the question he was asking at the time, the reason he brought some researchers and graduate students together, was to ask, what do we know about learning and cognition and the arts? What do we know about those things together? And as far as empirical research went at the time, they had to say, we know zero. And when they first started going after grants with that name, some people came back to them and said, this is not a name we can get behind funding. This is not, like Project Zero just doesn't, it's not giving us much of a high bar to fund. But apparently Goodman was a bit of a curmudgeon, and so he stuck to the name. In some ways, I think the name's good. It's a little strange, and it makes people ask what you're about and how you got started. So it ends up that we keep retelling how sort of the place got started through that name, which I think is a good thing. We do still look at learning cognition in the arts, but we also look at learning in a lot of other domains. We look at learning across organizations, learning with adults, learning in the digital realm, learning in museums, etc. So arts is still a part of what we do, but it's not all that we do. And early on, Nelson Goodman grabbed two researchers, one named Howard Gardner, which was mentioned earlier, and another one named David Perkins, and they were the first two co-directors of Project Zero and are still very much involved with the research that goes on there. We run 2 summer institutes every summer. I'm the coordinator of one called the Project Zero Classroom, so if anybody wants to spend a hot week in Cambridge with us sometime in July, please come join us. They're a lot of fun. Artful Thinking is a project that was funded in Project Zero, which the funding actually ended in about 2007. The project started actually in classrooms, K-12 classrooms in Traverse City, Michigan, across a large district that's there. It came about working with some teachers who were interested in using art in their classroom, but really felt like they didn't know enough to bring art in, and were very intimidated by the idea about bringing art into their classroom. And the goal there is that to use art to teach about thinking. And when I say art, there's a lot of fine art and objects today that we're going to look at, but also dance, music, poetry, so we can stretch that definition of art there. Art to teach about thinking and thinking to teach about art. This is a picture of my classroom from several years ago with some students using a thinking routine, looking at an image. So I think what I'd like you to do with me now is a key practice at Project Zero is to really have the educator take on the role of learner. There's a ton of expertise in this room about teaching, about learning, about art, but I'd like you to start out this Saturday morning just as a learner and to experience us looking together at something and just give into that sort of learner mode and see how that feels if you're willing to go there with me. In a moment, I think I'm going to ask to turn the front lights down a little bit, Ryan, just a little bit, so that the image comes through really clearly. See how that goes. If you would, place your eyes on the image in front of you. If you can't see and you want to move and be more comfortable, please feel free to move so you can see it well. As you settle into the picture, take a moment to sit up as tall as possible. Straighten your spine from the belly all the way up to your neck. Relax your shoulders. Take a long, deep breath and try to hold the world still, all your Saturday morning concerns and errands and things in your mind, and be fully present in the moment with this image. Take one more deep breath and try to breathe in this picture. Allow your eyes to wander over the surface of the image. Some parts of the picture probably caught your eye immediately. Other details will take longer to emerge. Let your eyes follow the path of lines. Of colors. We don't just see with our eyes. Take yourself into the image and consider that scene with your other senses. Look at it through your ears. What sounds or conversations, noises might be around. See through your nose, your sense of taste and touch. Imagine how this world looks from someone else's perspective. Try to see through the eyes of one of the individuals in the picture. Or from an object's perspective. Consider what story might be unfolding here. What happened before? What might happen next? take a moment and turn to somebody near you and share a few of your first impressions from this looking. What you noticed. What did you hear from somebody when you shared that just was different than your original line of thinking? Okay, here and then there, and maybe one back there, okay? So,
Yes, my partner pointed out that the scene made it sound noisy, cafe noisy, and I never considered noise. You know, I do color and line, but I never considered noise.
excellent. Okay, great. Cafe noisy too.
Yeah,
cafe noisy. Yes.
One of my partners pointed out the yellow background with, it had, the shapes could be more heads in there, and I couldn't even see that. So,
Obviously, there could be a bunch of us. So there's a pattern back there, but there's a noticing that the patterns could be more
so it could mean, it could
rows.
contribute to the feeling of noise, you know, with the more heads, or sort of ghost-like effect.
Excellent, great. Somebody else, you were, yes, thank you.
My partner mentioned the angle of the table and the silverware, or the dishes and the implements on the table looked like they were ready to slide off.
Cruise ship, something happening there with this motion, no. Just extreme angle of the table and then the feeling like we should go catch it. Can I hear one or two more, way in the back? Give a like,
Okay, so the strangest thing about this painting, or lithograph or whatever, is that there's an arm coming out, and it looks as if the woman is hugging the man in the tuxedo, but then the guy sitting next to her also has the arm coming out.
maybe, but so trying to figure out who's touching involved with who and where the placement of arms are was a consideration, a question that came up, a puzzle that was raised. One or two more things people heard, or a question that came up, a wondering or a puzzle that came up that you hadn't noticed right away, but you heard from somebody else you spoke with. There and then there, okay?
Well, on the plate in front of the man who's being kissed, there appears to be a coat of arms on the plate. And the strange thing about it is that usually a coat of arms would be at the head of the plate, properly set, but it's at the side.
So we're looking at this piece right here?
Yes.
And the shape of it is reminding you, or like of a coat of arms that you might see on platter, but you're wondering because thinking that if you were to set the table, you would have put it so the coat of arms is facing the guest. Okay, a wondering that came up. One more, there, yeah?
We were just looking at the actual drawing itself, that the entire thing is rather flat, except that the chair is dimensional.
So it has this kind of very sort of flatness to it until all of a sudden you get in that back corner of the chair here closest to me where it starts to see those three-dimensional techniques in there. Okay, so I'm just noticing about that and wondering about it. Okay, can we get one or two more? Yes, sorry.
Lautrec poorly defines things like the chair, only the corner of the chair here. And as Laura pointed out, where is everybody, the anatomy? Where is the fat man's arms? He seems to have no arms.
So a big wondering is about this sort of loose lines, loosely defined,
exactly.
and then the curiosity about that looseness makes you start to really have a puzzle about who's touching what and where the bodies are there.
You have to fill in a lot.
And yet there's another piece that's defined on this one end, so that's a contrast, and that's something that's kind of a wondering. Okay, I'll take one last. Yes?
My partner and I actually were both wondering what do those words underneath says, if they're originally in the art or if it's part of like a flyer, and if it's French, because we kind of feel, we are guessing it says library at the bottom, on the right bottom, and if it's like it's a flyer.
Certainly, so something many learners are going to come up and be curious about is these words at the bottom, which lots of art you look at does not have words involved, so there's a combination of some text and information there. Was it an original part of the piece? What language is it? What is it saying? What do we do when we don't know language that's available on an image? How does that make us look at it differently, deal with it or not deal with it? So lots of puzzles and questions coming up around there. One last puzzle question, big thing that came up? Yes?
Well, we were
And
wondering.
then, but there and then there. I think, did I see another one there? Okay.
Were you talking to me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. We were wondering why she was interested in this old man and the other one.
So we're wondering about relationships that may be forming in the image, choices the woman seems to be making, not judging, of course, but just curious about perfectly handsome red-headed gentleman and being issued for somebody else. Okay? So there's some very sort of personal connections and thinking about the relationships going on in the image. Was there another hand up there? Yes.
It kind of goes along with what she was saying, but I was really focused on the kiss, because everything seems to go back to that kiss, and then that got into the feeling of a kiss, the smell of this dude, whatever, kind of thing, and the wondering of the story.
So we have that, coming back again, mentioning some of these loosely drawn things. However, we have this physical thing happening that we connect a lot of ideas around. What does it feel like? What does it, kisses smell, they have sound, they have a feeling, and it's right sort of there in the center and what's going on there. With just the moment of the kiss, and also with the relationship of these people and what's happening there. So a lot of connections to some things we know, and puzzles and questions all coming up. You want to do one last one there? You have your hand up, and then I'll move on. Yeah?
I just think that kissing in French culture is often a greeting, not an emotional response.
I can't hear. So kissing is a greeting, often in French, so keep going, I apologize, got a little loud.
She's kissing you on the cheek or the nose, not on the mouth, and so it may be just a greeting. It's possible.
So another possibility with some connection making to something you know about French culture is maybe it's just a two-sided quick. Could be we're just catching that moment right before she moves on and takes her red-headed date off the dance floor or something. No. But so there's the kiss itself, our connection to what we know about the kiss too could mean something in one way, and it could mean something else. So you're just connecting to what you know about that. And take one last one here, and then I have to move on.
I kind of made up a story about it. It looks like the Moulin Rouge in Paris, and maybe she's a can-can dancer, and that is her boss. And perhaps the name might be Victor Jouvet.
It's hard to hear, I apologize.
And I don't speak French, but I'm guessing like the Reign of Joy or the King of Joy. And that might be the name of his restaurant, perhaps, and maybe she is one of his employees, one of the can-can dancers. And
So there's a lot of wondering about the possible relationship and story, but there's also a lot of connecting to things you know about certain time period, possibly the artist, where he chose to paint, the area in France where he chose. So there's a lot of connection to things you know, and some time, but also still wondering about what's still unfolding in this story here. So a lot of wondering and connecting with what you're seeing there. Okay, I'm going to press pause here. There's plenty more we could do. And I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath again. Keep this image in your mind. You have this image in your mind. There's a lot in it, but try and hold it. And now, take a look at this. Just breathe in and let that settle for a moment. And I realize I'm moving at a faster pace than I'd like to. I'm going to ask you, with these two images, in your mind, make a little list. I have 5 up there, it's just a number, of a few commonalities, a few comparisons that come to mind. And as we make comparisons, too, in our mind, we also parse things that are dissimilar, things that, so we start to do with that, right? Contrasts as well. Both of those things happen. People have some comparisons in their mind? That they follow? Are there things about the first work now that you're thinking differently about because you were asked to connect or compare to another work? Is there a new way anybody's seeing or thinking differently about this at this point? Yes?
I noticed that all the eyes are closed.
I noticed that all the eyes are closed. So just a noticing that you're making now from looking at the two of those, okay? And you're looking now across both images. Yes?
Sensuality versus intimacy.
Could you say a little more about that?
The first one is more sexual, more physicality, whereas the other one, I think there's still an intimate relationship, but I think it's more one of intimacy and caring versus the sexualness of it.
So looking between the two, something possibly it's about that kiss or the proximity, but there's something there that's, while there's two
Still
figures
close.
still close, there's something different about it that you're naming in these two ways. Great. Here and then there.
Well,
And then there.
just bouncing off of what you said, but it's two different cultures away of expressing.
So another thing you're thinking on top of that is possibly that difference could come out of a cultural difference as well. That's a possibility. Great. Good wondering came up here, and then there's a hand there.
I was thinking the same thing about cultures, but my partner also, it's very Japanese by the way they're dressed. But in the other one, it is the French language written on there that tells you that it is France. And then from there you can talk about what the cafe and all of that. But it was the cultural differences of how different cultures tell how they're going to react.
So there's
Seeing
cues
someone.
in both images
Yes.
that allude to specific culture, and from there you're getting different ideas from those cultural cues that are in there. Okay, we had a thought here, and then I'll come back. I think there's one there and there.
I feel a lot of heat coming off of the one on the left. And
Did people hear that? She feels heat coming off of the one on the left. I think we're getting back to your passion. Okay.
and definite coolness coming off of the other, like
Let's make sure we can hear people.
summer versus winter, and a lot of noise on the left and profound silence on the right.
So ideas about even temperature associations with hot versus heat in different ways. Personal passionate heat, kind of, and some coolness, but also noise-wise, vivacity, some loudness, and some quietness are some experiences that you're having from the two. Okay, and I think I picked some people in here, right?
Yeah, and
So
I was just looking at the composition and color, just building off of that. Really, it's the same colors used in both of the prints, but with very different results, the hot and the cold going on. And the use of the red in one is pronounced, the other one, it is very subtle. And then the composition, someone earlier talked about the diagonal line on the French side, and a lot of activity. It's much more, it moves more. And then the Japanese one is very quiet, very cold, very restrained.
So in addition to looking just at the two images in front of you at face and noticing tons of different comparisons you can make, there's a question now about artists and possibly influence of one painting or a conversation between one painting possibly and another one. And so now we're bringing in the idea of what the artist might have been influenced by or thinking by or looking at also comes up there. These nuances and all these yellows too that are just doing one color you're really looking at here. And talking about how it really affects things as it moves through the two images. Just conversation on one color. So we have we talked earlier about some somewhat simple lines in some ways, and somebody else mentioned the eyes across all four, but just gesture in these two, you're noticing a big contrast, and then how that makes you feel about that character based on just how those eyes are drawn and how that line changes. There is a ton we could keep talking about with these two images. I'm going to ask us to just hold off on a minute, and I can share a little bit about what we just did, and then talk with you about some thinking moves we made, and then have you go upstairs yourselves and do it. The thinking routine I just did is simply called See, Wonder, Connect. And actually, it's a routine that did not come out of the Artful Thinking project originally. It's a routine that the National Gallery of Art has adapted, taking some different Artful Thinking routines and coming up with something that really worked for them. And the connection part here, all I first did was just a little sort of breathing language to get you sort of in and focused on the moment. All of that language I've actually typed up, and they're in the slides for you if it's helpful and that's something you want to play around with. Just so you know, I've hidden those slides. There are a lot of text, but they're in there for you. In museums and in classrooms, when we're looking, we really want to build that disposition to observe. And so we're just asked to come in, but we were asked to look and invited to look with our eyes, but also look by what it might sound like and what it might feel like, and brought in a number of ways. Your wonders and your questions came up, and the connections were first to things you knew about the image or didn't know, connecting to what maybe somebody in your seat partner said that you hadn't thought of, and then finally bringing in another image and connecting to that. Obviously, this makes great sense to, when you're in a room and thinking about a theme, if you're sharing that as a docent or as a classroom teacher in a unit, or connecting to other works a curator has in the room, or even connecting to another piece in the gallery or a piece of text or something else that your learners are working with. So very simple routine that you can take tons of time with. We have spent 1 hour with one image doing a routine like this with young learners, and you could keep going. And I know there were people in the room I didn't get to call on who still had ideas about how these two images connect and could have kept talking about them. So that is a thinking routine that you have. In Artful Thinking, we probably have about 15 different thinking routines. All of these routines are educator created, so the language is yours. It's just using a language of thinking, much of which you already do, and deciding though, how can I notice when a learner's observing versus when they're questioning and when they're making connections, and how might I point it out to those learners when they're making those three moves, those three very different thinking moves, and make them aware of what they're doing. You're in a wonderful place to do this kind of work, but I would argue a classroom is a great place to do that as well. But one of the things that's afforded by a museum is it can offer us an environment where we might take some extended time to look at something. We might look at things that are a different size or three-dimensional from what we can do in a classroom with only an LCD screen all the time. Get to see some live art and see the actual size of it, the actual texture of it. We have opportunities to do deep looking, to hear conversations by curators or docents and see how things are placed side by side. One thing might be in conversation, that might be historically, it may be thematically. We have an opportunity for open-ended inquiry. I didn't answer any of your questions this morning, any of the wonderings that came up. I didn't give any information about the piece of art yet. And you were able to bring your own impressions and ideas to the work and start, A, getting invested in caring enough to find out more about the work, and B, being able to bring what you do know to it, to start asking your own questions about it that you might pursue. So we really have an opportunity to start with the learner's own ideas, which is something I really want to stress today.